All right. I guess we are recording. Yes, it says we're recording. So there. To all my thanks to all my viewers for tuning in once again. I'm a little under the weather. I'm just getting over a cold, so I might cough now and then. My dog's here. He might bark. I'm a little lacking in energy. I've switched from my live webinar platform to Zoom. Since I was not in the classroom when the COVID hit. I
Right.
never used Zoom. So I'm using Zoom for the first time so I don't run into audio problems again. So it's all a big experiment today, but this is great. Despite all that, I never pass up a chance to talk to my old pal, Kale Zelden, always full of insight. Kale teaches at a prep school. What's the name of the prep school again?
Yeah, I teach at Portsmouth Abbey School.
That's right.
I'm the head of the humanities department and a golf coach. In fact, I'm going to scoot off here in a little bit to go to my
Ooh.
golf team practice. So yeah, so it's I'm in between classes right now. So
Okay, great. So we'll make this quick. You
yeah,
also do the podcast with Rod Dreher,
yeah, yep,
who's now in Hungary, and
right.
so on. So let's get started. What we're going to be talking about today are once again these broad ecclesial issues,
Hmm.
especially Vatican II. It seems like
Hmm.
everybody and their blind hamster pets writing on Vatican II these days, including myself,
Right.
because of the 60th anniversary. Ross, how do you pronounce his name?
It's
Anyways, you have.
Douthat. Douthat.
Ross Douthat at the New York Times, a
Hmm.
sort of famous conservative Catholic, as you might imagine, New York Times, came out with an article last week, an essay, an opinion piece, said Catholics are kind of trapped by the Second Vatican
Hmm.
Council.
Hmm.
And he met some rather negative things by that. And of course, that has now set off a firestorm of rebuke from the usual
Yes.
circles. So, Kale,
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll get this conversation started. We'll go to
Yeah.
you first.
Mhm.
What is your take on his essay? What's your opinion of it?
Well, I mean, of course, understanding that I'm going to say I like this piece, and people will say that it's because it confirms my priors. In full recognition of that, no, I like the piece. I thought it. What I think Ross does well is that he can kind of take a sort of a wide angle view, kind of look at patterns and help his audience take a look at the pattern. And insofar as he does that, he is, I think, among the best commentators that we have. And perhaps one of the reasons why I appreciate this particular piece is that he does not do what we typically do in Catholic circles, which is kind of get into the weeds theologically. I believe that, of course, is important, and maybe we can. I want to talk at some point about your piece on the 60th anniversary because I wonder if some people in your audience would say, "Oh, well, Larry calls it, a great success, and Ross has called it a failure." And I don't think that these two pieces, are ultimately at odds with one another, which is one of the reasons why I said, Larry, we got to fire up the cameras and see what we can do. I mean, I think the if I would sort of the subtitle of the piece is, wars within Catholicism, and I think that is, insofar as he's able to lay out the sort of the basic pieces on the board. I think he does a good job. You and I have talked about a year ago we talked about the Communio school and the Concilium school and all the sort of the stuff in between. And I, as a layman and not a trained theologian, but rather as what I do in my own sort of day job is I look at patterns in stories and literature, and so that's something that attracts me. And so when I look at this situation, I can sort of hold what you correctly say as the successes of the Second Vatican Council, but at the same time recognize that what Ross has laid out in his piece is also true. He says this. Well, 5 or 6 paragraphs down in the piece, he says, instead, the council poses a continuing challenge. It creates intractable seeming divisions, and it leaves contemporary Catholicism facing a set of problems and dilemmas that Providence has not yet seen fit to resolve. And insofar as that's the sort of the thesis of the piece, I think he's correct.
Yes, I do too. I have a new essay on
Mm.
Vatican II coming out soon in Catholic World Report, which is going to specify with some more sort of academic clarity
Mhm.
what I meant when I called the council a success. I mean,
Yeah.
primarily, well, there are some superficial metrics, such as, the increased role of the laity in the
Right.
church, even though we're hemorrhaging laity. I
Mhm,
mean, you know
mhm,
what I mean? I actually think, even though the liturgical reform was botched,
mhm,
that having mass in the vernacular is
mhm,
a good thing. And so we could go on those sorts of things. But what I specify more in my next article is that,
mhm.
yeah, the council was in many ways, as Douthat points out, I mean, it was a pastoral failure. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody would agree that the post-conciliar church has been a bit of a catastrophe.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, and I don't understand how you get around that. I really don't. I've seen a number of threads that have been bounced around the interwebs, on Twitter and Facebook and other outlets, and well, no, it's not a failure. I mean, look at the global South, and then the sort of they do this fascinating move where they are contending that the global South in increase in numbers is like due to the council, and I'm just like, what? I mean, that's a weird, like, how do you draw that straight line? Just not sure how you can do that.
yeah, the thing is, my take on I agree. So you sent me those tweets and so on where
Yeah.
people are critical of Ross, saying, "Look to the global South. How
Right.
dare you say that the
Right.
church is not been growing and so forth." And it is true that there was, for a few decades, explosive growth of Catholicism in Africa. I'm
Right.
not certain that explosive growth is continuing, or whether it's sort of
Right.
flatlined right now. I don't know. But just
Well,
about
to
Go
that
ahead.
point, just so people understand what we, the underlying realities of demographic shifts um manifest downstream from original movements up or down, right? So,
Yes.
so for instance, people will say, well, the world is like heavily populated and we're worried about overpopulation. But if you really look into the numbers, that we're actually heading for a demographic, catastrophe, falling off
Yeah.
of the cliff, right? Because
Yeah.
it takes people a long time before they become adults and they elect not to have children, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the growth in the global South is a little bit misleading. I mean, would that it were not so. I wish it were. But the we're going to see that the numbers are going to catch up. The cliff is impending.
It's true, and I agree. And the thing is this, though,
Mhm.
just as I don't think that you can say that the Second Vatican Council caused the explosive growth
Correct. Right.
of Catholicism in Africa, I also don't think that it's right to say that you can blame the council for the decline of Catholicism just about every place else.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
mean, all of Europe, even Ireland and Poland, are now going to pot. North America, Latin America is going Protestants, going evangelical,
It has
Pentecostal.
been has been for 25,
So
35 years.
this is my take on this.
Mhm,
The reason why I don't trust the explosive growth in Africa, by the way,
mhm.
is the exact same reason why Catholicism is declining every place else. And what's why it's declining every place else is called liberal bourgeois modernity.
Right,
It's
right.
my point is this: Catholicism would have suffered the exact
Yep.
same crisis and decline had the council never happened. Because if you look at non Catholic versions of religion,
Could take the
Judaism,
Presbyterian Church,
all across North America
Mhm.
and Europe, what you find is decline. I mean, the
Sure.
fact is, wherever Western consumerist bourgeois culture
Mhm,
encroaches,
mhm.
religion diminishes. Those cultures secularize, and then you find this cognitive dissonance between the people in the pews and their culture. Something has to give, and it's the church that gives. The church either goes belly up and says, "Hey, let's just get with the culture," then
Right,
it proves itself irrelevant and people leave. Or the church can simply dig in its heels and say, "We're going to ignore all that," and you're still going to hemorrhage people. So, my
right.
point is that as Africa becomes affluent, as it
Yeah.
becomes westernized, as it becomes capitalist, consumerist,
Mhm.
bourgeois, liberal, and is exposed to all of Western media and stuff, it's already happening in places. I think you're going to see a decline of religiosity in Africa as well.
Mhm.
So, one of the criticisms I would make then
Yeah.
of the Douthat
Mhm.
article is that he does seem to make, I think, that same, but in my opinion, same tired argument that you see from the trads all the time. Post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Yeah, right,
There
right.
was this crisis after the council, therefore it was because of the council. Well, please show me what it was in the council that
Hmm.
told people you don't need to go to church anymore,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
priests, you need to leave the priesthood now, or hey, all
Hmm.
you theologians, you need to dissent from church teaching now.
Hmm.
Hey, all you liturgists, right? You need to
Hmm.
come up with some cockamamie new liturgy now. It didn't. Something else triggered all of that. And my point is that had Vatican II not happened, it was a catalytic event. It was an accelerant.
Yeah, yeah.
It was igniting combustibles that were already there. Ratzinger was already pointing out in 1958 in that
Right.
article, "The New Heathens in
Yeah.
the Heathenism." And you get my point. So
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm with
your
you.
comment, your comment.
Well, yeah. Okay. So then, so then, it would be kind of for nerds only a fascinating sort of sci-fi what if, but what would have happened, say, had the council occurred, and there are a bunch of what ifs, right? I mean, if the council had occurred and John the 23rd had not died after the first year, or if Paul the Sixth had not changed the mass, you know, there seems to be a kind of a collection of things that sort of came together to act as the accelerant that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I you know, I think everybody knows this. I've said it out loud before. Like, I'm not a trad. I go to Novus Ordo parish and monastery parish, and it's not it's not lost on me that you can't just blame one thing. You can't just blame one thing. But I can't tell you how many. All I can account for is like what I knew growing up, right? And I did a tweet thread the other day about this, and people dismissed me or tried to dismiss me as just having aesthetic concerns, right? That I was sort of talking about silly season and all the stuff with silly season. And those were not just aesthetic problems, right? Yeah, fine, I have an aesthetic problem, let's say, with a clown mass. I have an aesthetic problem, like an actual clown mass, like they actually happened. I think we need to remember that. But I had an aesthetic problem with, stupid, banal jokes, to sort of kick things off, or whatever, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff, right? But to me, the aesthetic depredations indicate something else as well. And as I think about, the council, I think we tend to sort of think of the council in a way that sort of makes sense to us, right? So you, Larry, you're a theologian, right? And I think that you've written very compellingly on why Vatican II is not only necessary, but Vatican II has given us things that are deeply important. For instance, the fact that you and I are having this conversation right now, despite the technological sort of advances that allow us
Yeah.
to do it, these are, you and I are two laymen. I'm not
Yeah.
even a theologian, right? And so, we're having this kind of conversation because, in a large sense, Vatican II sort of cleared the ground to allow us to have a conversation like this. And so,
There were no lay theologians.
right, and I think one of the great pieces that you shared with me in the last year or so, I think it was in Belly's article on Vatican II, and it really helped me to appreciate just how much of a child of the Second Council I am, right? That that
Right.
that
Right.
that while I can certainly look back with some degree of romantic longing to a world before the changes, I really am thoroughly and completely a child of the Second Vatican Council, and sort of the way that I see the world, the universal call to holiness, religious liberty, a lot of these things that you lay out in your article, 100%. So then I ask myself the question, all right, well then what's the rub? What is my problem? So help me out.
Yeah.
Like, well, I read
Yeah.
Ross's column, and I'm like, yeah, like, that actually kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah. I think our problem is that the chaos did happen. And
Yeah, yeah,
the
like
natural,
actually,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
and look, next week I turned 64. I
Yeah.
lived the
Right.
chaos. I
Right.
was born in 58. I don't remember the council,
Right.
but my formative years all happened in the
Yeah.
wake of the council. I remember
Yeah.
clown masses. Those
Right.
happened,
Yeah.
and forget the aberrants, the clown masses and stuff. There was just this general ethos of everything's up for grabs now, folks. And I blame once again bourgeois modernity, because a media culture had already developed by the 60s and 70s, and what the church didn't understand, that the reality that was going to
Yeah.
ensue was whatever reality the media spin imposed. And Pope Benedict spoke about this. There was the real
Yeah.
council and the council of the media,
Yeah.
and that and the progressive wing of the church understood this and made
Mhm.
liberal use of the mass media to spread this idea that everything is about to change. All right, so that's kind of
Right.
boilerplate, cliche,
Yeah.
conservative gobbledygook talk about what went wrong. But I think we need to remember, okay, think of where you teach, Kale.
Yep.
All right, what we all need to remember is that in some ways the council was a victim of some of its greater successes that we now take for granted.
Mhm.
So, for example, how would you feel if the church still taught that almost all of your non-Catholic neighbors are probably going to go
Right.
to hell?
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah.
certainly your Jewish neighbors are going to go to
Right.
hell.
Right.
Okay.
Amen. I mean, like, to me, that, like,
Or
that's the number one. That's the
and that
number
they
one
don't
thing for
have
them.
an inherent right to religious freedom.
Right. In other words, the crew that would say, not only kind of get a little bit over exuberant about mass damnation, and you know, and believe, for instance, this whole error has no right. Yeah, like, I can't be party of that.
Yeah.
Like, I just,
You know,
and that's what I mean. Like, I'm a child of the Second Vatican
so
Council.
that this is what I'm saying. All the crisis notwithstanding, and we both
Yeah.
acknowledge that that's boilerplate now.
Yeah.
Let's stipulate that it was insane. And I agree with what you said earlier. The causes are multifocal.
Yeah.
All right. Was the council partly to blame? Yeah,
Mhm.
along with a whole bunch of other factors. But let's think clearly here. Do we really think that the Latin Mass,
Mhm.
the old moral manuals, a
Mhm.
theology of most people that aren't Catholic are going to hell,
Mhm.
that non-Catholics do not have an inherent right to religious freedom,
Mhm.
that Jews are responsible for the death of Christ, and so on?
Sure.
Okay, that image, that reality of the church, that would have withstood the cultural tsunami of the 60s and the 70s. I
No,
think,
yeah, of course
I
not. Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it would have been worse off,
Mm.
worse off
Well,
had
and perhaps, again, we can look to other denominations for some sort of analogies with all this, and you've already invoked
they're
that.
the
But
control and the experiment.
right, I was just going to say, but there's something particular and unique about the boasts, and I use that word on purpose. I know it might get me in trouble, but the boasts that the church has made with increasing frequency post Trent, or in Trent and post Trent, you know, don't afford a ton of wiggle room
Yeah, yeah.
when it comes to things, right? And what you have then is, in essence, is you have this anti, almost sort of reactionary revolution, right? That sort of runs concurrent with and against the tides of modernity that flower up, explode rather, in the French Revolution, and make their way
Right.
forward. Looking at what happens in 1961, 2, 3, 4, 5, out of the context of what is happening in 17, 90s on in and
Yeah.
throughout the 19th century, seems to me part of the reason why we lack a certain resolution, or inability to make sense out of what we're seeing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm glad you brought up Trent. This is actually a cultural process that has been about 500 years in the
Yeah.
making, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Trent obviously was a great council, a great reforming council. It had great, by the way, and it took a good 60, 70, 80 years for all of the reforms of Trent to fully kick in.
Yeah.
But it did sort of circle the wagons. It
Totally.
reformed seminaries and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it shored up the walls and all that for the storm that was to come.
But it came at a cost, Larry. It
Yeah,
came at a real cost.
exactly.
And I think we're living in the cost. Look, this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and it's like nothing is free. Everything costs. There's no ultimate avoidance of anything. So in the end, you have to pay, no matter what. Just sort of thinking that as okay. So so much of modern bourgeois liberal capitalist world in which we reside in is a great pretend that we don't have to pay for anything. Right. And this, this has analogs in family structures. This has analogs in governmental structures, fiscal structures. It's like we really energy. We really do pretend that we can have such a thing as free energy. And we know we can't. Like, if you really sort of sit with it for a minute, you can't. So go back to Trent. Okay, so Trent is a reaction to a real crisis. I personally would argue that the church really bungled the whole thing, soup to nuts, when it came to Luther. And we are as much to blame for Luther as Luther is to blame for everything. So anyway, fine, kill me in the comments, people. I can take it. Okay. So Trent is this attempt is like, okay, we're going to like think about it as sort of extreme COVID lockdown. Like, we're going to go zero Protestant. People talk about zero COVID, and we're looking at China right now, and they're doing zero COVID. Well, the church tried to do like zero Protestant. And okay, what are the costs of that? Well, the cost of enumerating all of these little details is that non-Catholics are going to hell.
Yes.
Jews, hell. Right? Anybody who's not with Peter, hell. Right? And it's undeniable that the church taught that for a really long time.
Yes, it did.
So cue, young Larry Chapp, and he's 5 years old, as the council is unfolding, and your parents are looking at this like, well, phew, my gosh, let's open things up a little bit here, people. Sally and Bill, who live down the street, and they go to church on Saturdays as opposed to Sundays. Like, that's good to know that they might not be going to hell. Like, exactly. Like, that's a real phenomenon. Like, that's a real thing. And so again, theologically speaking, you and I can break down all those things, and we can kind of dive into the weeds and render certain kind of explanations. But on that kind of lived level, it's like, it doesn't hold.
Yeah. I mean, it goes, like you said, it goes back to this uber defensive mentality of a sort of it's a fear-based mentality. I doubt that there are actually that many people in the church hierarchy who truly believe that every non-Catholic in the world, with some exceptions, is going to hell. But I think they had
now
that.
Or then what do you?
Well, back then.
Okay, good. Yeah,
I think most of them understood, well, that's a bit harsh, but there was this mentality of, you have to maintain this.
Right.
You have to say this. Otherwise, as you said, we give people wiggle room. And if you give people wiggle room, they're going to leave. You have to maintain the fear factory in order to keep
I
people
totally agree, man. I totally agree. What's so strange for me, Larry, and this is sort of me speaking personally here, there's all these movies, about like, Catholic guilt, and all these writers talk about Catholic guilt and all that kind of stuff, and like hyper scrupulosity and whatnot. Like, I just simply did not grow up that way.
Me either.
I really, like, my mom and dad were like really normal. Like, church was important. We said the rosary, like we did all, but like, I didn't like cower in like daily fear that I was going to have wrong thought, and that would send me to hell. So I have a hard time. I must admit, I have a hard time understanding the warpedness of that sort of hyper Tridentine, hyper trad worldview, because it's very foreign to me.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with it at all. My parents, though Catholic, were utterly bourgeois and American.
Right.
Instilled in me the fundamental values of Midwest Nebraska, 1950s, 60s, culture. Yeah. So and point of fact, as I was emerging into young adulthood, anytime I would see these tropes in movies about Catholic guilt and so on, I would just roll my eyes and say,
so
what the hell?
Right.
Where is this? What a caricature.
Right.
All right. But then I would talk to my parents about it, and they say, well, yeah, we didn't succumb to that, but a lot of Catholics were like that. They really
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
'Cause they said the nuns in the schools would
Yeah.
beat into you, you do
So
this, you're gonna go
right.
to hell, you do this, everybody was afraid that little tiny trip up that
That's right.
God had put into the moral universe
Right.
all kinds of freaking tripwires.
Right.
All right. That if it was like blowing a leg off in
Well,
Vietnam on a booby trap,
yeah, and I tell you, like, when I speak to my friends who sort of grew up with that kind of mentality, like it is a devastating come down, because like if that they this sort of fear-based mentality, all of it, right? So but so there's all this, I call it like it's like brand protection. When you work in like corporate world, you engage with sort of corporate branding and that sort of stuff. That's all this talk about protecting the brand, right? And I find that so much of the inherited Catholicisms prior to the council, where it was all about protecting the brand. And so and all the branch managers, of course, are the hyper scrupulous ones who are counting pennies and counting beans and all that sort of stuff, because not on my watch, we're not going to let anybody, not on my watch. And and if so, they had it coming to them or something. So I do understand all of that. So then my question is, what if what is it all for then? And I think a lot of people
yeah,
ask
yeah,
that question, at least implicitly ask that question, right? Look, why does any of this crap matter then?
yeah. I mean, and that is the problem that we now face. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of related questions to that too. What does it mean for the indefectibility or
Right.
infallibility of the church and all that kind of stuff? What is this right here? Hang on.
Well,
Yeah, and the thing is this. Look, the council, I'm gonna come back to the council just for a
yeah.
second, then
No,
we'll
go
answer
ahead.
some of
Yeah.
those questions. The council was not perfect, though. The problem with the council is, I always said, it suffered from a double naivete. It suffered
Mm-hmm.
from a naivete about the toxicity to the faith of modern
Hmm.
bourgeois culture.
Hmm.
It also suffered from a naivete about the internal strength of the church prior to the council, because even though it's a bit of a caricature, it is true that pre-conciliar Catholicism was this sort of fear of going over the moral tripwire,
Right.
and it's that sort of thing. And so what the council didn't understand was, as soon as it removed the tripwires, people weren't going to be fearful anymore.
Right.
And since it was a fear-based faith, the faith went too.
Yeah.
Okay. And at least faith in any sort of deep,
Sure.
profound, or meaningful sense.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, there was no deep and profound faith to begin with.
Right.
The
Right.
council simply kind of exposed that now because
Right.
the tripwires were all gone.
Right.
And there were no longer any cultural props for looking out for, like you said, the brand. The brand was diminished as everybody became this homogenized suburban thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
The immigrant status of Catholics as Irish and
Of course.
Italian went away. All right, now I'm just American.
Right.
And
Good
all
old
of that
American.
brand stuff, the tripwires, that's all gone. And the council's highfalutin theology was over everybody's head. I think the lasting legacy of the council was its theology. Okay, it failed as a pastoral council, but it was successful as a theological council. But who cares about that? That's
Yeah.
kind of the point.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. Yeah.
these deeper questions then. It's very, very clear, for example, the church used to teach that it's okay to burn heretics at the stake for
Right.
their on good, to purge
Correct.
their souls of their heresy so they can go to heaven. And most people are going to hell and so on. The church now teaches the opposite of that, or some version of the opposite of that.
Right.
So,
Yeah. It's a
what
little
does that mean?
unclear.
This is what is driving so many people into radical traditionalism, saying,
Right.
well, it
Right.
simply has to be the case then that the old church was right and the modern church is wrong. So
Right.
much the worse for the modern church. Thank God Vatican II was just a pastoral council, because now I can
Yeah.
reject
Right.
all of that.
Right. Right. And look, and to steel man that side, or at least to try to give a little bit of, to give the devil his due there. Like I get, look, imagine, you're 30 and you have grown up in the faith and you are trying to raise a family. You've got a couple of young kids and you see the chaos out in front of you, the woke stuff and the transgender stuff, all the sort of the chaos of the general culture. And you're looking at that and you're like, man, I need to hold on to something that's permanent, something that can kind of,
Yeah.
I can plant myself on some terra firma that I can make sense out of the world, because the world is way too complex, way too chaotic, way too scary. And I'm going to look to something that claims to be supernatural and has its foundation, or footing rather, outside. And so I get that. So then you do that, and then you look at the people like inside the tent, and like, man, like a lot of these people seem like they kind of want to tear it down. Like, so therefore, what they're trying to tear down the one thing that I actually think can save us. It can actually be the bark of Peter, like the thing, the boat that we all get into because the storm waters are coming. Right. And so you could just get into that kind of psychological headspace, right? You know, that's where you are. And I think that is why the council can be talked about theologically, it can be talked about politically, but what we never really talk about in terms of council is just the effect of having a once bold institution that stood for something seem like it no longer stands for something. And again, you can't blame the council for that per se. Like, I mean, if you read the documents, it sure seems like it stands for something. Like it's not a joke there, right?
Kale, this is why I like talking to you. I think you're absolutely brilliant.
Like,
Because I think you absolutely nailed the crisis of the moment, which is that so many trads want to go back to a time when it seemed like the church stood for something.
right,
I don't believe for one second that most trads believe that most of their neighbors, non-Catholic, are going to
right,
hell. But they're going to say that because it's part of a package that's
yep,
part of that
yep,
rock.
yep,
That so it's
yep.
like an ideological construct that they don't
It's a
they
boast. It's a
yeah,
boast. It's
it's
like,
a
yeah,
psychological coping mechanism,
right.
as you've said before.
Mhm.
Okay, and I don't mean to diminish or
Yeah, yeah,
dismiss people, but because we all have such mechanisms.
yeah,
Okay, but that, in my opinion, is deeply flawed because that is bad theology. And so
yeah.
now, however, what does the church stand for now? And this is the nature of the crisis. You've nailed it. Okay, it's not that the council directly caused the crisis; it's that in opening to the world and in developing an image of the church, a theology that is less hyper exclusive and now at least minimalistically much more sort of, if you can say minimalistic and much more
Yeah,
at the same time,
yeah, 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 yeah.
inclusive,
Right, right.
inclusive, then the question
Or
becomes,
at least the veneer of inclusivity, or the verbiage of inclusivity.
right.
It's not really, but anyway,
So
keep
then
going.
the question then becomes, why be Catholic?
Right,
If my Hindu neighbor can get to heaven and my Jewish neighbor
right,
can get to heaven, if
right,
my atheist
right,
neighbor can get to
right,
heaven, okay, then what is the point? What is the
right,
meaning of being a Catholic? And that is what the church has not articulated.
right.
It simply hasn't. It simply skirts on the surface of things. Jesus died for your sins, and you
Mhm,
get Jesus in the sacraments. So
mhm,
you
mhm,
want to
mhm.
come for the sacraments, don't you? Well, except that the liturgies are kind of banal. You
Right.
don't know most people at church. Community is lacking.
Mhm.
It's boring. People are annoying. I
Yeah.
got better things to do on a Sunday morning, and so on. Since you have not invested it, the church has not invested it with any new great missional vocational meaning. And
Mhm.
so this is, to me, the great crisis of the time. It's, you've nailed it. It's a
Mhm.
crisis of what is the church for?
Right.
What is its meaning? What is
Right.
its purpose? And therefore, what is our purpose as members of that church? And why should I extend myself to be a member of that church? And in my blog, I've attempted to articulate a notion of the role of the Christian, therefore, is to be a kind of substitutionary,
Okay.
vicarious advocate for the neighbor, um,
Huh.
for the other, that you participate in the church in order to participate in Christ, in order to participate in
Well,
the
okay.
vicarious solidarity. But that sounds like a lot of theological gobbledygook,
No,
but
it doesn't. It doesn't. I think you're exactly right. I've been thinking a lot about this idea, and I wonder what you think about this as a theologian. I I see that the church has consumed itself in the last several hundred years, let's say, 200 years, whatever, with precision in propositional reality, or an attempt at precision in propositional uh, uh, clarity and specificity. But what it is not built in my opinion, is compelling participatory being. Like, uh, in other words, we really, really care about right thought, but we don't seem to care so much about right worship. Again, and I know I'm going to
Right.
sort of like wade into sort of these like liturgy wars, and I don't want to go there because I'm not I'm not a trad, but I understand. Like, I know, for instance, like I have family members who are Latin mass goers, and for them, I know it's because they walk into this space and they're no longer they walk into Kairos space. I know I'm sort of blending to time. Like, they're walking inside of a place that's no longer just a place, because it's connected to mystery, which sort of exists, in the upper and lower registers, right? It's like they're walking into something that's not, a town hall meeting.
And I
We're
think
not going to talk about the plumbing. We're going to talk about like the mystery of being. And I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm
right,
going to
right.
experience the mystery of being.
And I think too, as I said in my recent article in the Register, and I think that's exactly right what you just said, that the good liturgy is important. But I think, I'll use my own experience of
Yeah.
going to the ordinariate. I
Yeah.
initially went to the ordinariate because I was attracted to the liturgy.
Mhm.
I think the liturgy by itself, since the ordinariate's an hour away from me, would have not kept me going. What
Right.
kept me going, and now I'm a member of the parish, is the community there,
That's right.
because
That's
it's
right.
a smaller
Yeah.
community. I got to know everybody, and it's an intentional community. This is
Yeah.
so important. And I
Yeah.
think this is almost the number one thing that draws traditional Latin mass
Totally agree.
people
Totally
to
agree.
the trad parishes.
Yeah.
It's not just the liturgy, because I have been at plenty kind of dry and boring Latin masses
Sure. Sure.
that
Yeah.
are any
Same.
great shape.
Same. Same. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what was great about those places that I went to, the ones